The station floated in the dark like a needle made of light. They called it the Spire, and it had stood at the center of galactic politics for over 6,000 years. Every species that mattered had walked its halls. Every war had been ended or started within its walls. And today, for the first time, a human delegation was walking through its gates. Han Do-hyun adjusted the collar of his uniform and said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that silence carried more weight than words, especially in rooms full of creatures who loved the sound of their own voices. Behind him walked Kang Nari, the intelligence director, and Park Ji-won, the head of Earth's Commerce Bureau. 3 humans. That was all Earth had sent. The Council had expected 100. They got 3. The hallways stretched long and wide, built for species twice the size of any human. The ceiling rose so high, it disappeared into soft blue light. Do-hyun's boots made no sound on the polished floor. He liked that. Let them wonder if he was even coming. The chamber doors opened on their own, and the noise hit him like a wave. 42 species filled the circular hall, seated in rising tiers around a central platform. Some were tall and thin like dried branches. Some were heavy and wide, their skin like cracked stone. Others floated in liquid tanks or hovered on gravity platforms. All of them turned to look at the 3 humans standing in the doorway. Do-hyun walked forward without hesitation. Nari and Ji-won followed half a step behind. The High Speaker of the Council, a being called Velthari, sat at the highest tier. He was old. His species, the Ilvasi, lived for thousands of years, and Velthari had spent most of his life in this chamber. His skin was pale silver, and his 4 eyes blinked slowly as he watched the humans approach. "Ambassador Han," Velthari said, his voice smooth and deep, translated perfectly through the station systems. "Earth is welcome in this chamber. Please, speak your petition." Do-hyun stopped at the center platform and looked up at the tiers of alien faces. He had spent 2 years preparing for this moment. 2 years of learning their customs, their politics, their weaknesses. He let the silence hold for 3 seconds longer than was comfortable. "High Speaker," he began, "Earth requests full membership in the Galactic Council, equal voting rights, full trade protections, full military treaty access. We have met every requirement listed in the Council's charter. Our record is clean. Our contributions are documented. We are ready." The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then a sound came from the left tier. It was laughter. Low, wet, bubbling laughter. Dren, the trade minister of the Pulori Consortium, leaned forward in his seat. He was short and round, with skin that shifted between green and yellow depending on his mood. He was amused. 200 years, Dren said. "Your species has been in space for 200 years. My people have been trading across this galaxy for 9,000. And you walk in here and ask for equal standing?" He laughed again. "You are children. Clever children, yes, but children." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Do-hyun did not react. His face remained still, his hands clasped behind his back. Beside him, Nari's eyes moved slowly across the room, reading every face, every posture, every twitch of every limb. Velthari raised a hand, and the chamber fell silent. "Ambassador, the Council recognizes Earth's progress. It is impressive for a species so young. But full membership requires more than ambition. It requires time. Trust must be earned across centuries, not decades. We are prepared to offer Earth an observer seat," Velthari continued. "You may attend all sessions. You may listen. You may learn. You will not receive trade protections. And you will not be covered under our military treaties." Do-hyun stared at Velthari for a long moment. "An observer seat," he repeated. "Yes," Velthari said, and his tone was warm, almost fatherly. "Think of it as a beginning. You are welcome to watch and learn. In a few centuries, perhaps, we will revisit this conversation. Another ripple of quiet amusement moved through the chamber. Some species nodded. Others simply looked away, already bored. Do-hyun looked down at the platform beneath his feet. Then he looked up again. "I understand," he said. "Thank you, High Speaker." That was it. No argument. No anger. No raised voice. The chamber seemed almost disappointed. They had expected the humans to fight, to argue, to bang their fists the way young species always did. Instead, Do-hyun bowed once, turned, and walked toward the door. Ji-hwan fell into step beside him. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight. He had spent 3 years building the economic case for Earth's membership. Every number was perfect. Every contribution was documented. And they had been dismissed in under 10 minutes. Nari walked on Do-hyun's other side. She said nothing until they were through the doors and into the corridor. The doors closed behind them, cutting off the murmur of alien voices. "They didn't even read the file," Ji-hwan said quietly. "They didn't need to," Nari replied. "They decided before we walked in." Do-hyun kept walking. His pace was steady. His face showed nothing. They reached the docking bay where their shuttle waited. The bay was cold and empty. A single Ilvasi attendant stood near the airlock, watching them with mild curiosity. Do-hyun nodded to her as he passed. She did not nod back. Inside the shuttle, the doors sealed, and the engines hummed to life. Ji-hwan dropped into his seat and rubbed his face with both hands. Nari stood near the window, watching the spire shrink as they pulled away. "So," she said without turning around, "what now?" Do-hyun sat down slowly. He looked at his hands. Then he looked out the window at the glowing needle of the spire, surrounded by the ships of 42 species, all of them older, all of them larger, all of them certain that humans were nothing worth worrying about. "Now," Do-hyun said, "we give them exactly what they asked for. We sit, we watch." He paused. "And then we leave, and we take everything we built with us." Nari turned from the window. A small, cold smile crossed her face. "They have no idea what they just did." Do-hyun leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. "They will." The shuttle slipped into the dark, and the spire glowed on behind them, bright and proud and completely unaware that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy had just walked out of its doors without making a sound. It started slowly, so slowly that no one noticed at first. A relay station near the Pelori border went dark. It was one of 37 communication boosters that Earth had built and maintained across Council space over the past 60 years. The station simply stopped transmitting. When the Pelori sent a maintenance crew to investigate, they found the station empty. The equipment was gone. The power cells were gone. Even the hull plating had been stripped clean. All that remained was a small beacon repeating a single message in Galactic Standard. "License expired. Property of United Earth. Removal authorized under Trade Code 7-14. Dren, the Pelori Trade Minister, barely glanced at the report. "One station," he said. "They are making a point. Ignore them." Within 2 months, 11 more stations went dark. Park Ji-hwan had planned this for a long time. He sat in his office, on Earth's orbital platform, a cup of tea growing cold beside him, and watched the numbers move across his screen. Every human-built relay, every licensed piece of technology, every trade agreement that Earth had offered under voluntary terms, all of it had expiration dates. He had made sure of that decades ago, long before anyone thought it would matter. Now those dates were arriving, one after another, like dominoes falling in a line. He did not rush. He did not need to. Time was on his side. On the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Yoon Sora stood on the bridge of the battleship Ironfall and gave the order she had been waiting to give for 6 months. "Recall all joint patrol units, all of them. Every corridor, every sector, every checkpoint. Bring them home. Her executive officer, a young man named Cho Unji, looked at her. All of them, Admiral? The Tasari border corridors too? All of them, Admiral. Those corridors see heavy pirate activity. Without our ships there, I know what will happen, Sora said. Her voice was flat and steady. Bring them home. The recall took 3 weeks. Human patrol ships, which had been guarding the space lanes for nearly a century, simply turned around and flew back to Earth space. No warnings were sent to the Council. No explanations were offered. The ships just left, and the corridors went quiet. The pirates noticed before the Council did. Within a month, attacks along the former human-guarded lanes increased by 200%. Within 3 months, the number had doubled again. A Pelori cargo fleet, carrying medical supplies to a colony world, dropped out of hyperspace into what had once been the safest route in the sector. There were no human ships waiting. There were 4 pirate cruisers. The cargo fleet was destroyed in 11 minutes. Dren screamed at the Council. Where are the humans? They are supposed to protect these lanes. Fenrath, the quiet representative of the Yevni coalition, leaned forward. They were never required to protect those lanes. They did it voluntarily. We gave them nothing in return. No vote, no treaty, no protection. And now you are angry that they stopped giving us free security? Dren's skin turned a furious shade of red. They have an obligation. They have no obligation, Fenrath said. We made sure of that. We gave them an observer seat, remember? Observers have no obligations, and no protections. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence, but the lanes were only the beginning. Human medical ships had been running frontier health programs for 6 species across the outer colonies. These ships carried doctors, medicine, and equipment that most species could not produce on their own. When the ships returned to Earth space, the programs ended overnight. Within weeks, diseases that had been controlled for decades began spreading again. A respiratory plague swept through 3 Pelori border colonies. A parasitic infection that human doctors had nearly eliminated returned to the Tessari frontier with devastating speed. Omalka, the military commander of the Tessari Empire, sat in her war room and stared at the reports. Her border defense network had relied on human long-range sensor arrays, technology that Earth had shared freely as a gesture of goodwill. Those sensors were now offline. Her border was blind, and something was moving in the dark beyond it. She sent a message to Velthari. The humans have withdrawn their sensor network. My eastern border is exposed. I need the Council to provide replacement systems. Velthari's reply came the next day. The Council does not possess equivalent technology. We recommend you negotiate directly with Earth for renewed access. Then she closed her eyes and sat very still for a long time. She was a warrior. She had fought in 3 wars. She had never felt this particular kind of fear before. The fear of realizing that someone you dismissed was the only thing standing between you and the dark. Fenrath called an emergency session. He stood at the center platform, the same platform where Dohyun had stood a year ago, and spoke to a chamber that was finally willing to listen. The humans are not attacking us, he said. They are not threatening us. They are not demanding anything. They are simply leaving. And everything they built, everything they maintained, everything they gave us freely because we were supposed to be their partners, all of it is going with them. He paused and looked around the chamber. We are not losing a war. We are losing a foundation. And most of you still do not understand how deep that foundation goes. Velthari listened with his 4 eyes half closed. When Fenrath finished, the High Speaker waved a silver hand. The humans are emotional. This is a tantrum. They will return when they realize they cannot survive without the Council's trade network. With respect, High Speaker, Fenrath said, look at the numbers. Earth's internal economy has grown every year for the last century. They trade with 18 non-council species. They are self-sufficient in food, energy, and military production. They do not need us. He let that sink in. We need them. Valthari said nothing. The chamber said nothing. That evening, a transmission arrived at the Spire from the Galactic Council's communications office. It was addressed to Ambassador Han Do-hyun, and it requested clarification of human intentions regarding the ongoing withdrawal of services and infrastructure. The message traveled across 3 relay stations, 2 of which were still functioning only because their licenses had not yet expired, and arrived at the ESS Silent Dawn, where Do-hyun sat alone in his quarters. He read the message, he set down the datapad, he looked out the window at the stars. He said nothing. And in the corridors of council space, in the dark lanes where human ships no longer flew, in the silent clinics where human doctors no longer worked, in the blind borders where human sensors no longer watched, the galaxy began to understand what silence really sounded like. The famine came first to a small colony world called Pulavar 6, a dusty planet near the edge of Pulori space, where 20 million people depended on grain that grew only because of human soil treatment technology. The license for that technology had expired quietly 8 months ago. The Pulori had not noticed. They had never needed to notice, because the humans had always renewed it without being asked. This time, no renewal came. The grain failed in the 3rd growing cycle. Then it failed again. By the time the Pulori Agricultural Ministry realized what had happened, 3 colony worlds were running out of food. Emergency shipments were sent, but the supply lines were strained. The pirates that now roamed the unguarded corridors hit 2 out of every 5 convoys. Food prices across Pulori space tripled in a single month. Dren stood before the council and pointed his thick finger at the empty observer seat, where no human had sat for over a year. "This is an act of war," he shouted. "They are starving my people." Fenrath did not even look up from his datapad. They are not starving anyone. They simply stopped feeding people who refused to treat them as equals. There is a difference. There is no difference to the 20 million people on Pulavar 6. Then perhaps you should have thought about them before you laughed at the humans in this very chamber. Dren's skin went white with rage, a color that meant something very dangerous in Pulori culture. But he said nothing more. He had no argument left, and everyone in the room knew it. Far from the council, in the cold space along the Tasari Empire's eastern border, Commander Omalka was fighting a war she could not win. A species called the Harak, aggressive, territorial, and barely sentient by council standards, had been pushing against the Tasari border for decades. They had never broken through, because human sensor arrays had always detected their movements months in advance. Every raid, every fleet movement, every supply buildup was visible on Tasari screens, thanks to technology that Earth had shared for free. Now the screens were dark. The Harak hit 3 border outposts in a single night. The attacks were brutal and fast. By the time Tasari reinforcements arrived, 2 outposts were destroyed and the 3rd was burning. 4,000 Tasari soldiers were dead. Omalka stood in the wreckage of the 3rd outpost and looked at the sky. She was tall, even for a Tasari, with thick gray skin and eyes like black glass. She had fought the Harak before. She had always won. But she had always had human eyes watching the dark for her. She returned to her command ship and opened a channel to her intelligence chief. "How did we miss their approach?" "We did not miss it, Commander. We simply could not see it. Without the human sensor grid, our detection range has been reduced by 60%. The Harak approached from a vector we cannot cover." Omolka closed the channel. She sat in her chair for a long time. Then she opened a secure file on her personal console, a file she had been building for weeks. It contained a single document, A full analysis of every contribution humanity had made to the Tasari Empire's security over the past 90 years. The numbers were devastating. Human technology covered 40% of Tasari border surveillance. Human medical teams had treated Tasari soldiers in 3 different conflicts. Human engineers had helped design the shield generators on 12 Tasari warships. All of it given freely. All of it now gone. She closed the file and looked at the wall. On it hung a Tasari war banner, old, faded, earned in a battle she had won 30 years ago. She had won that battle because a human sensor station had warned her of the enemy's approach 4 days before they arrived. She took the banner down. Back on the Spire, the Council's economic analysts finally completed the report that Fenrath had been requesting for months. The report was 200 pages long, but its conclusion could be stated in a single sentence. Humanity had been carrying the galaxy on its back, and no one had bothered to notice. The numbers were made public for the first time. Humans had built and maintained 31% of all cross-species communication infrastructure. They had shared 22% of all medical research with Council species at no cost. They had provided 40% of frontier security through voluntary patrols and sensor networks. They had offered agricultural technology to 14 species, water purification systems to 9, and emergency disaster response to every member of the Council at least once. All of this from a species that held an observer seat. A species with no vote, no trade protections, no military treaties. The report landed on every Council member's desk at the same time. The chamber was silent for 3 full days. No sessions were held. No speeches were given. The numbers spoke louder than any voice. On the 4th day, Valthari called a closed session. Only the senior representatives were invited. The doors were sealed. The recording systems were turned off. Or so they thought. Kang Nari was already listening. She sat in a small room aboard the Silent Dawn, her fingers moving across a console that linked to a network of intelligence assets she had spent 20 years building. She had sources in the Spire. She had sources in the Pulori government. She had sources in places the Council did not even know existed. Information was her weapon, and she wielded it with a surgeon's precision. Valthari has proposed a military delegation, she told Dohan, a fleet of Council ships sent to Earth space to remind us of our obligations. Dohan sat across from her, a cup of tea in his hands. He looked tired. The past year had been long, and the silence had been heavier than any of them expected. But his eyes were sharp. What was the response? Mixed. Dren supports it. He wants to threaten us into reopening the trade licenses. Most of the smaller species are too afraid to object, but Omalka spoke against it. Omalka? She told Valthari, and I'm paraphrasing here, that threatening the species that built the walls they hid behind would be the last mistake the Council ever made. Dohan set down his tea. For the first time in months, he smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, and it did not reach his eyes. She is smarter than the rest of them. She lost 4,000 soldiers last week. Pain is an excellent teacher. Dohyun stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was falling apart, and all because a group of old, proud aliens had refused to share a table with the new arrivals. Tell Captain Bake to move the fleet, Dohyun said. I want every ship we have positioned at the border of Earth space, full formation, running silent, lights dark. Nari raised an eyebrow. That is not a small statement. It is not meant to be. I want them to see us. I want them to count our ships, and I want them to understand that we are not hiding. We are waiting. 2 days later, the Council sent a diplomatic envoy to Earth space, a single ship carrying a junior ambassador from the Ilvasi delegation. The ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of human territory and immediately began scanning. What it found made the junior ambassador's 4 eyes go very wide. 200 human warships hung in perfect formation across the border. They were dark, no running lights, no active signals, just metal and silence, row after row stretching across the void like a wall made of shadows. The ambassador opened a communication channel. Static answered. Then, after a long pause, a single recorded message played. The voice was calm, neutral, and human. Earth space is not receiving diplomatic vessels at this time. Please return to Council space. This message will not repeat. The ambassador turned his ship around. He did not stop shaking until he reached the Spire. The junior ambassador's report spread through the Spire like fire through dry grass. 200 warships, dark, silent, waiting. The image of that wall of shadows burned itself into the mind of every species on the council, and it changed everything. Velthari tried to hold the line. He called a full session, and stood at the highest tier, his silver skin catching the light, and spoke in the calm, ancient voice that had guided the council for centuries. Earth is posturing, he said. This is a display, nothing more. They want attention. They want us to come crawling. We will not give them the satisfaction. But the chamber was not listening to Velthari the way it used to. His words fell into silence, and the silence felt different now. It felt like the silence the humans had been using against them for over a year, heavy, patient, and full of meaning. Velthari proposed a military coalition, a united fleet that would travel to Earth's border and demand the restoration of all withdrawn services. We are the Galactic Council, he said. We do not beg. He asked for a show of support. 42 species sat in that chamber. 2 raised their hands. 2 small frightened species who had no real military and wanted desperately to believe that someone else would solve the problem. Arrest sat still and said nothing. Dren did not wait for the council to act. He had never trusted anyone but himself, and he was not about to start now. 3 days after the failed vote, he sent a private trade envoy to Earth space, a small ship carrying one of his best negotiators, and a cargo hold full of luxury goods, meant as gifts. The envoy was allowed to pass the border. That alone surprised Dren. The humans were willing to talk. He took this as a sign of weakness. He was wrong. The envoy was received at Earth's orbital station by Park Jihan. The negotiator, a Pelori named Brelin, was escorted to a simple room with a table, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking Earth. Jihan was already seated when Brelin entered. He did not stand. Brelin placed a datapad on the table. Trade Minister Dren extends his personal greetings to the people of Earth. He wishes to propose a private arrangement, a bilateral trade agreement between the Pelori Consortium and Earth, separate from the Council. Jihan looked at the datapad but did not touch it. Please continue. The terms are generous. Full access to Pelori markets, priority shipping lanes through our space. In return, Earth would reinstate communication relays in Pelori territory and resume medical supply shipments to our border colonies. Jihan sat quietly for a moment. His face revealed nothing. Then he spoke. Do you remember what Minister Dren said the day we petitioned for full membership? He called us clever animals who learned to barter. He said it in front of 42 species, and he laughed while he said it. Brelin shifted in his seat. Minister Dren has many opinions. Not all of them reflect. He laughed at us in open council, Jihan said, and his voice was still soft, still calm. Now he sends you to this room to beg in private. Do you understand what that looks like? Brelin said nothing. Jihan reached into his coat and placed a second datapad on the table. These are our terms. Full financial reparations for 60 years of uncompensated human contributions to Pelori infrastructure. Retroactive trade tariffs on all goods that move through human-built communication networks. And a formal public apology from Minister Dren, recorded and stored in the Galactic Archive. Brelin stared at the datapad. His skin turned pale green. These terms are extreme. These terms are fair, Jihuan said. You used our technology for 60 years and paid nothing. We are simply sending the bill. He paused. The price was much lower a year ago, but that was before your minister laughed. Brelin left the station within the hour. He did not take the luxury goods with him. Far from Earth, in the cold halls of a Tessari warship, Commander Omulka was doing something that went against every instinct she had. She was reaching out. Omulka had spent her life believing that strength was the only language the galaxy understood. Ask for nothing. Show no weakness. Win or die. That was the Tessari way. But 4,000 dead soldiers and a blind border had taught her something new. Sometimes the strongest thing you could do was admit you were wrong. She opened the secure channel to Admiral Yoon Sora. No intermediaries, no diplomats, just one soldier speaking to another. Sora was on the bridge of the Ironfall when the transmission came through. She read the sender's identity and raised an eyebrow. Then she accepted the channel. Omulka's face appeared on the screen. She looked older than Sora expected. Her dark eyes were heavy with something Sora recognized, the weight of losses that could have been prevented. Admiral Yoon, Omulka said, I will not waste your time with pleasantries. My people are dying on the border. The Harok have launched 4 more raids since we lost the sensor grid. I cannot see them coming. My soldiers are fighting blind. Sora listened. She did not interrupt. I was in the chamber when your ambassador petitioned for membership, Omulka continued. I did not laugh like the Pulori, but I did not speak in your defense either. I sat in my seat and said nothing. That was its own kind of insult, and I know it now. She paused. Her jaw was tight. This was costing her something, and they both knew it. I am not here to beg, Omulka said. I am here to say that I was wrong to stay silent when the council dismissed you. Tell me what you need to hear. Sora studied Omulka's face through the screen. She had read the files on the Tessari commander. A soldier with 40 years of service, 3 wars, 12 campaigns, a record of honor and courage that most species would envy. And here she was, on a private channel, admitting fault to a species her council had treated like children. Commander, Sora said, it was never about what we needed to hear. It was about what the council refused to see. Omulka lowered her head slightly. Then help me see it now. Sora did not answer immediately. She looked at her hands, then at the stars outside the bridge windows. I will pass your words to Ambassador Han. I cannot make promises, but I will make sure he hears you. That is enough, Omulka said. For now, that is enough. The channel closed. Sora stood on her bridge and thought for a long time. The cracks in the council spread faster after that. Fenrath, who had been warning them from the beginning, finally made his move. He gathered representatives from 14 species, all of them smaller nations who had relied on human support and received nothing from the Council in return, and formally announced their withdrawal from the Galactic Council. The announcement sent shockwaves through the Spire. 14 species walking away from the same table that had refused to give humanity a seat. Fenrath's statement was short. We joined the Council for protection and partnership. We received neither. Earth offered us both and asked for nothing. We will seek our future with those who value contribution over age. Velthari watched the announcement from his private chambers. His silver skin had turned dull. His 4 eyes stared at the screen. And for the first time in his very long life, the High Speaker of the Galactic Council looked afraid. He opened a direct channel to the ESS Silent Dawn. The message was brief. Ambassador Han, what do you want? Do-hyun read it in his quarters. Nari stood beside him. Ji-won sat in the corner, already running numbers. Do-hyun picked up his datapad and typed a single line in reply. "We wanted a seat. Now we want the table." He sent it. Then he set the datapad down and waited. The Spire had not hosted an emergency summit in 300 years. The last one had been called to end a war that killed billions. This one was called because a single species had stopped helping, and the galaxy had nearly torn itself apart, trying to survive without them. The chamber looked different now. Of the 42 original members, 14 had left with Fenrath. 3 more had quietly requested temporary leave, a polite way of saying they were waiting to see which side won before choosing. The remaining seats held species that looked smaller, older, and more tired than they had a year ago. Han Dohyun walked through the doors of the council chamber at exactly the scheduled time. Not a minute early, not a minute late. Behind him walked Kang Nari, Park Ji-won, Admiral Yoon Sora, and Captain Baek Tae-ho. 5 humans. Still fewer than any other delegation. Still enough. Their boots made no sound on the polished floor. The chamber was silent as they crossed to the central platform. Every remaining eye, every sensor, every lens in the room was fixed on them. Do-hyun stopped at the center and looked up at the tiers. He remembered the last time he had stood here. He remembered the laughter. He remembered Dren's yellow skin and Velthari's fatherly dismissal. He remembered walking out through those doors with nothing but an observer seat and a plan he hoped he would never have to use. He had used it, and here they were. Velthari sat at the highest tier. He looked diminished. His silver skin had lost its glow. His 4 eyes moved slowly, carefully, like a man walking through a room full of broken glass. When he spoke, his voice was still smooth, still deep, but the warmth was gone. In its place was something that sounded very much like caution. "Ambassador Han," Velthari said, "the Council recognizes Earth and welcomes its delegation to this emergency summit." He paused, and the next word seemed to cost him something physical. "As equals." The word hung in the air. Do-hyun let it hang. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply waited 3 seconds, the same 3 seconds he had waited the first time he stood on this platform. And then he spoke. "High Speaker, members of the Council. 14 months ago, I stood here and asked for something simple. A seat at this table, equal standing among partners. The Council's answer was clear. We were too young, too small, too new." He looked around the chamber. "We accepted that answer. We took our observer seat, and then we did something that this Council never expected. We stopped. No one spoke. No one moved. We stopped maintaining your communication networks. We stopped guarding your shipping lanes. We stopped sending doctors to your colonies. We stopped sharing technology we spent decades developing. We stopped doing the work that this Council took for granted because it was given freely, and freely given things are easy to forget." His voice was calm. There was no anger in it, no bitterness, no triumph. Just facts delivered with the precision of a man who had rehearsed nothing, because the truth needed no rehearsal. 14 species have left this Council. Your borders are exposed. Your economies are strained. Your people are sick and hungry in places where they were healthy and fed a year ago. And all of this happened because you would not share a table with the people who built half of what is on it. He let the silence hold. Then he reached into his coat and produced a single datapad. He placed it on the platform. "These are Earth's terms for re-engagement with the Galactic Council. They are not requests. They are conditions. Full permanent membership with veto authority. A restructuring of the Council's voting system to weight influence by contribution rather than age of species. A formal, archived acknowledgement that Earth's decades of uncompensated service were exploited without representation, and the creation of a mutual defense compact in which every member species was required to contribute. No exceptions, no free riders. The chamber stirred. Dren leaned forward, his skin flickering between colors too fast to read. "This is blackmail," he said, but his voice was thin, and the words sounded hollow, even as he said it. Do-hyun looked at him. "Minister Dren, you are welcome to decline. We will simply walk away again." He paused. "But ask yourself, can you survive it a second time?" Dren opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He leaned back in his seat and stared at the floor. Velthari spoke. "And if we accept these terms, what guarantee do we have that Earth will honor its commitments?" Do-hyun met his gaze. "High Speaker, Earth has honored its commitments for over a century. We maintained your infrastructure without being asked. We protected your borders without compensation. We treated your sick without thanks. The question was never whether Earth would honor its commitments. The question was whether this council would honor us." The vote was called. It was not unanimous. Dren voted against. Two smaller species followed his lead, more out of wounded pride than logic. But the rest, every one of them, voted yes. The terms were accepted. The session was recorded in the Galactic Archive, where it would remain for as long as the council existed. Every word, every vote, every silence. As the chamber began to empty, Omalka rose from her seat and walked down the tiers toward the central platform. The Tessari commander stopped in front of the admiral and stood at attention. Then she raised her fist and pressed it against her own heart. The highest Tessari military salute, reserved for warriors who had earned respect through sacrifice. "You earned this," Omalka said. "Not with weapons, with patience." Sora looked at her for a long moment. Then she raised her own fist and pressed it to her heart, mirroring the gesture. "Your soldiers deserved better than a blind border. We will make sure they never fight in the dark again." Omalka held the salute for 3 more seconds. Then she turned and walked away. She did not look back, but her steps were steadier than they had been in months. In the corridor outside the chamber, Fenrath caught up with Do-hyun. The Yevni representative was small, barely reaching Do-hyun's chest, with large dark eyes that missed nothing. He fell into step beside the ambassador and walked with him in silence for a while. "I have a question," Fenrath said finally. "Ask." "Did you plan all of this from the beginning? From the very first day they gave you that observer seat?" Do-hyun stopped walking. He looked back at the chamber doors, now closed, the light from inside glowing faintly through the seams. He thought about the day he had walked through those doors for the first time. He thought about the laughter. He thought about the long, cold year of silence that followed. He thought about the people back on Earth who had trusted him to get this right. "We did not plan to leave," he said. "We planned to be worth missing." Fenrath looked up at him. Then he nodded once and walked away without another word. 3 days later, Captain Beck Teho stood on the bridge of the ESS Silent Dawn and watched through the forward viewport as the first relay stations came back online. Across Council space, human engineers were reactivating communication networks. Human patrol ships were moving back into the space lanes. Human medical teams were boarding transports bound for the colonies that needed them most. The galaxy was exhaling. Teho had been quiet through all of it. He was not a diplomat or a politician. He was a captain. His job was to fly the ship and keep his crew alive. But he had felt the weight of the past year as deeply as anyone. He had watched his fleet sit in the dark, lights off, engines cold, and wait. Wait for the galaxy to understand what it had lost. Now the waiting was over. He opened a fleet-wide channel. Every ship in the Frontier Fleet, 200 vessels, each one crewed by people who had spent a year in silence, was listening. "All ships," Teho said, "resume standard operations. Reactivate running lights. Power up patrol routes. We are back on the line." He released the channel and waited. For a moment, there was nothing, just the hum of the Silent Dawn's engines, and the vast, endless dark beyond the viewport. Then, from every ship in the fleet, from every bridge and every crew station, a single word came back through the channel. It was not shouted. It was not cheered. It was spoken the way humans speak when they mean something with every part of themselves. Quiet, steady, and sure. Finally, Tejo smiled. He leaned back in his chair, looked out at the stars that his people had guarded and lost and won back again, and let the words settle over him like sunlight after a long winter. The humans had walked away in silence, and when they came back, it was the galaxy that said thank you.